I'm going to dive right into the subject. We've got some real challenges in protecting the national security of the United States, starting with the budget issues that are implicated because of the need to reduce our federal budget deficit. Now, I tend to be optimistic by nature, but I recall the difference between the optimist and the pessimist. You remember, the pessimist is the guy that says things are so bad they can't get any worse, and the optimist says, sure they can. This could get worse, but it's bad enough already. I want to make 3 quick points. First of all, defense spending is not the cause of the budget deficits, and it's not going to have to, it should not be the answer. The reason I'm going to try to make these 3 points is each one of you in your own environment, among your constituency or those with whom you have influence in conversations, need to be making these same points, I think. And the charts that Bill mentioned at heritage.org, which I think are going to be emailed to you, help to make the arguments that I'm making. But first, defense is not the cause of the problem, and therefore it cannot be seen as the solution to deficit reduction. Second, defense has already taken huge hits, especially in the last 3 years, but really over the last several years, but particularly in the Budget Control Act of 2011. And third, a point that I won't even expand on, because for most of us it's intuitively obvious that you set a defense budget based upon your needs and requirements for national security, not based on some artificial percentage or number because of deficit reduction. And I think we all agree with that. Just 3 quick quotations that establish the first point. Former Secretary Gates: I've long believed and still do that the defense budget, however large it may be, is not the cause of this country's fiscal woes. Current Secretary of Defense Panetta: the defense budget is by no means the cause of the deficits, the huge deficits that we are incurring today. And nominated Joint Chairman of the Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey: national security didn't cause the debt crisis, nor will it solve it. And those charts that I referred to certainly demonstrate that further. Secondly, defense spending as a percentage of GDP, percent of the budget compared to entitlements, no matter how you cut it, defense has been declining over the years. There's a huge chunk now taken out of defense as a result of the Budget Act that we just passed, and that is bad enough. The things are bad enough already. They can't get any worse. Of course, yes, they can, is the potential for sequester if the recommendations of the Joint Select Committee are not adequate or are not approved by the Congress. And that's the last thing that I'll mention. But just a couple of statistics to make the point. Defense spending has shrunk from 7.4% of GDP in 1965 to about 5% of GDP today. Contrast that with Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. It's grown from 2.5% to over 10% of GDP. If you compare this as part of the federal budget, it was spending on Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security was only 14% back in '62. It's now 43% and on its way up to over 50. Defense spending, by contrast, has shrunk from 49 to less than 20% of the budget. Our debt is roughly $15 trillion, as you know. If you totally eliminated all of the security spending, not just the 050 account for the Defense Department, it would amount to $684 billion, which wouldn't make a dent in this $15 trillion. We've already taken our share of cuts. Beginning in 2009, we faced substantial cuts. In that year, Gates's budget terminated 30 procurement programs totaling about $330 billion. I won't go into the details of each of those, but in 2010, again reduced the President's defense budget request. In 2011, the Defense Department ordered by the White House to cut another $78 billion in the 5-year in the FYDP. But the final action on the 2011 budget and therefore appropriation bills, Congress trimmed the Department of Defense spending by $24 billion compared to the administration's request. We just got the latest numbers on the allocation for defense, and it's about $26 billion. Can absorb those kind of reductions, be absorbed in 2012 and 2013. Remember, we set this, and defense, again, at best is going to be basically level in those 2 budget years. It depends upon how the money is allocated. But the fact is, while Panetta and others are talking about the ability to somehow or other make do with substantial reductions in various programs and a readjustment of some of the missions because we won't be able to perform missions that currently exist, while they talk about that, they uniformly warn against what they call the devastating impacts of anything further. For example, that which would happen if the sequestration called for under the Budget Act actually had to take effect. Secretary Gates, just in today's, this is just one of the reports, said Wednesday that the $400 billion in cuts that the Pentagon may face over the next 10 years can be handled, but he warned that further reductions would have a catastrophic effect on national security. He made those remarks at the University of Texas. And there are many other defense experts who put it in at least as dire terms. When we've had our first meeting, this is the only inside scoop I'll give you about this so-called super committee. But when we met as Republicans, and obviously the chairman had to ask the question now, what will the proper mix be between mandatory reductions and discretionary reductions? It raised an important question, because Congress theoretically decided on the discretionary reductions in the agreement that resulted in the Budget Act that was just adopted a little while ago. That Budget Act that set the 2012 and 2013 numbers, as well as what we have available for this year. And that was the 900 and some billion dollars, not quite $1 trillion in reduction. Well, how do you get $1 trillion? You multiply by 10 years, add interest savings, and you can set your discretionary spending today. And if you abide by the numbers that you set out over a period of 10 years, if you do all of those things, then you can get 900 and some billion dollars in reduction from what we otherwise would have spent, adding in interest savings as well. So there's some feeling that the discretionary side of the budget has already now provided its answer to deficit reduction. And the focus on this Joint Select Committee was to try to find savings from the entitlement programs, which were not dealt with. And you can deal both in the non-healthcare entitlement side and healthcare entitlement side without totally revising the way that healthcare is provided to senior citizens or the Social Security is provided and so on. You can, I'll just put it in a very colloquial way, in a $3.5 trillion budget, 2/3 of which is entitlements, there is enough slop in the system that you can find $1.5 trillion in savings without deeply cutting into benefits or totally readjusting how these programs work, although they will require some adjustment. People kid about waste, fraud, and abuse, but it's real. And if we have the courage to face that, we can find the savings without forcing additional discretionary cuts, which of course would implicate defense spending. And I'll just close on this point. When we had our first meeting, the chairman asked, well, what do we think about defense spending? And I said, I'm off of the committee if we're going to talk about further defense spending. First, we did discretionary spending in the Budget Act. Second, defense was half of that, even though it's not half the budget, obviously. And third, we can't afford anymore, and that's what your defense secretary, past and current, and others have said. So we're not going there. Now, in order to make that a reality, those of you who believe that point of view need to be able to get out and make the point, convey the message. And the data is there, partially in these charts that I referred to. Plenty of other data that you can find to substantiate the fact that defense is given enough already, and were it to take any further hit, it would be inimical to our national security around the globe. So my point of view is that defense should not have any additional cuts. But this committee has to be successful, or this sequestration could become a reality. And I guess my final point is this. The only reason I voted for the Budget Act, notwithstanding this onerous, draconian potential sequestration that would literally kill defense, because it would be another $500 billion reduction over 10 years on top of another 350 to 500 that's already baked in, is that I said I would do my best to see to it that it never took effect. In other words, that we would waive it. We always talk about we have to build something where we can't waive it. Well, this is one we would have to waive. And so I would do my best to prevent that sequestration on defense. all of us are going to have to be marching in the same in the same direction here in order to save defense. It's critical for the security of our nation. I appreciate your interest in doing so. Thank you. Did I take too long?
That was great.
One question?